Hey, welcome back to Mr. Music's Weather Whiteboard. I'm Mr. Music, and today we'll be talking about fronts. And through this video, I'll probably drop in some drawings, pictures as well. I'm not an artist, but I'm more of a meteorologist. So let's talk about fronts, and there are really 5 that I want to talk about. And fronts are really major lines of delineation between temperatures, generally speaking. So first and foremost, we'll start with cold front. And I'll use blue for cold. So the cold front, and again, I've talked about this before, but in meteorology, very symbolic even with the colors and symbols. So cold front, and again, I'll put some drawings down, but so cold front is going to be laid out like this. And these little triangles are often solid triangles. And it's going to be in blue, and the way I remember this is that blue is cold again, and these little triangles, I visualize those little icicles hanging off my gutters. So it's cold. So blue, little blue, cold, icicles, triangles. When you see the front, the symbols are showing what direction the front is moving. So the cold air is over here, and it's replacing warmer air that's over here. So when you see the front, you need to know the air mass is on the opposite side of what the symbols are. The symbols are showing what direction it's going. So cold front, cold air behind it. Cold air is more dense. Cold air moves faster than warm air. You should know that. And that's a cold front. And here I'll show you a little bit of a symbol of a 3D version, or more of a cross-sectional version of a cold front. Okay, so that's a cold front. So what's the opposite of the cold front? Is a warm front. And a warm front, red front here again. So the warm air is here. The symbols are going to be these little half semicircles. Again, they're going to be solid. And not that they're going to be on the symbols, but I always remember those as little sunshines. So as the cold had the blue triangles like icicles, the warm front going to have these little half semicircles. And again, the warm air is over here. The symbols are showing what direction it's going to go to. And I'll show you another picture of a warm front and a cross section. But it's important to note in a 3D side of this, I always picture this, is that jumping back to a cold front, if you notice in that picture before, cold front, ground, very dense air, very close to the ground. It acts like a bulldozer running in, and then your warm air is going to ride up on top of that. You're going to get clouds up here, and this is often you're going to get storms out in front of a cold front. Whereas with a warm front, because it's less dense than the cold air, and the cold air is already over here, and the warm front's replacing the cold air, the warm front kind of looks in profile more like that, as it's moving in this direction. And that's because the cold air is more dense. So it's kind of riding up over top of it as it's replacing it. So why is that important to note is that the higher level air of a warm front is going to be the first to arrive. So as a warm front bringing in generally more moist air, one of the things you may notice, if you're here on the ground, as it's moving this direction, the first thing you might see are very high level clouds full of moisture. Generally high level is going to be ice crystals. So you may see cirrus clouds first as a warm front is approaching. As it continues to move across, you're here now, you'll see mid-level, maybe stratus, altostratus clouds, and then ultimately maybe cumulo clouds, or depending on the situation, cumulonimbus clouds. So as it approaches you, the clouds come lower, 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 because the actual front is moving closer to you. So that's cold front, warm front, and profile. I'll show you the pictures of that if I haven't already. So cold front, warm front are your first 2. The next front is what's called an occluded front. And as we mentioned before, cold fronts move faster than warm fronts. And this is pure cyclogenesis, what's called cyclogenesis, or developing, you know, how a cyclone develops. And usually you're going to have a low pressure system setting right here. Here's your warm front, warm front, warm front. So there's warm air here because it's moving this direction. There's cold air over here. But because the cold front is moving faster, it's like a swinging gate, this is going to catch this at some point in time. So what happens as it catches it, it ultimately catches it. So you're going to have symbols where it's going to look like this. And you may see it one of two ways. You may see red, blue, red, red, blue, or you may see it all in purple, but the symbols are round, triangle, round, triangle, round, triangle. That's an occluded front. And I'll show you here in a second a picture of side view, if you will, cross-section of occluded front. An occluded front is basically when a cold front catches and begins to overtake a warm front. And secondarily, only to cold fronts is where you're going to see lines of storms. Cold front, you're going to see generally storms out in front of cold front, primary location for thunderstorms. Secondarily, it's going to be your occluded front. All right, so cold front, warm front, occluded. Number 4, the fourth front, is what's called a stationary front. I'll just put stationary front. And what is that? That's a front where it's kind of the Mexican standoff, if you will. Stationary front. So usually the tricky part of this is that knowing what side of that front is the warm air and what side is the cold air. So if you remember, the warm air is here because it's showing it's going in this direction. All right? So this is warm. The cold air is always going to be opposite. The air mass is always opposite symbol. So this is your cold air over here. So what's happening in a stationary front is basically that. It's stalled. It's the Mexican standoff. They're like this. There's no movement plus or minus. It hasn't quite overtaken it. So cold air on one side, warm air on the other, stationary front. So warm front, cold front, occluded front, and stationary front. And then the last front has less to do with temperature and more to do with the water content, the relative humidity. And that's called a dry line front. And oftentimes you're going to see it like this, kind of in a brown or orange bumps like this. It's called a dry line, sometimes called a dew point front. And all that means is that the temperature may be relatively similar, but there's a huge disparity between moisture content. Very high relative humidity possibly on one side, very dry on the other. So a dry line front delineates moisture, whereas the other 4 fronts are really delineating temperature. So that was your 5 fronts: warm front, cold front, stationary front, occluded front, and dry line front, sometimes called a dew point front. This is Mr. Music, Mr. Music's Weather Whiteboard. Look forward to seeing you back sometime soon for another video.